G'day, it's Clinton Brett from Diesel Help Australia. Today I'll be presenting you how to successfully remove and replace common rail diesel injectors from the Toyota 1KD FTV using the Denso common rail injectors. I will also demonstrate a number of other injectors including the Bosch Piezo, Bosch non-Piezo, the Delphi and the Siemens injector. There's a number of tools that you want to have available for the job. It includes your general hand tools, open-end spanners, a couple of sockets. You want to have a torque wrench. Brake clean is a must. You must clean the area before working on it. Compressed air. A number of other specialized tools is the compression tester. Okay, it's a diesel compression tester. It includes adapters for glow plugs. It includes adapters for injectors for non-common rail, indirect, and direct injection and common rail injectors. The part number that we'll be using today for the compression tool is the DM13-145A. That is a suitable compression test to apply to most diesel applications. So when the injectors are seized in the cylinder head, you want to look at a tool that can successfully remove the injector without damaging the injector. Whether you're going to replace that injector with a new one or reuse the old one, the best way to go about it is to remove it cleanly without actually damaging any other part of the engine. Now, so one of the things is that we need a slide hammer that also has multiple adaptations to the top of the injector. So the slide hammer tool provided from Mechanic Tool Hire for this operation today is a DM21-1905. It comes with the slide hammer itself. It also comes with a number of adapters to adapt to the injector, such as in when you've got to remove the solenoid, or you can just bolt it straight onto the top of the injector inlet, or you may want to use the legs that actually clamp underneath and hook underneath the injector to enable to lift it out without removing the solenoid. So in general, when you're actually using those particular tools, the slide hammer tool as such, make sure you pre-soak around the injector using a good mix of 50-50 acetone and transmission fluid. That'll help break up a bit of the rust around the injector and any carbon that's been leaking past the injector washer. Another tool that's absolute must when actually removing and replacing injectors is a tool to be able to clean the seats without cutting the seats. What we use is the Delphi YDT252. That's an injector cleaning tool. It also has a section of it that you can actually use to remove the injector washers when in a difficult position. So during this process, always be aware of your surroundings. Make sure you're in a clean environment. Keep away from dusty environments, anyone working with grinders or welders as such. Before you get started, you need to make sure that you have a dust cap kit. So before you work on any diesel fuel injection product, please make sure you are working in an absolute clean environment. Common rail diesel systems do not like dirt or contamination, and anything that can cause an engine to fail under your watch is not something you want to experience, okay? So make sure you got a dust cap kit. These are readily available from Diesel Help Australia. So first we're going to go along and remove the injector pipe nuts at the rocker cover itself in first, and unscrewing all the way till it becomes loose. Leave it in place. Don't try to remove it without actually undoing the rail itself. We remove the pipe straight away, and some dust caps on the rail. It's difficult to put them on the injectors right now because you must remove the seals. Before you actually lift the rocker cover, you can see the injector inside the rocker cover there. Now if you look close enough, you can actually see the injector almost protrudes halfway through the seal. So the problem you're going to come across if you don't prepare yourself earlier on is you'll pull that rocker cover up and you won't be able to remove it all away because the seal will actually grab onto the injector itself and will most likely rip the seal. So number one, you won't be able to reuse them if they're only low kilometres. We do advise you actually replace them every time you do an injector removal. Here's they have a little indent, little recess here, and you just gently pry them out, particularly if you're going to use them again, but probably best to pry them out without damaging them, because if it does happen to rip and drop a piece of rubber in, you'll have a piece of rubber sitting in the engine you may not see. So you just pry them out Very simple operation. The injector seals themselves at the top here. Leave them in place there. They come in from the rocker cover underneath. Usually located on dowels. Shuffle it around a little bit of manoeuvring around, and there we go. The rocker cover is removed. We're going to dust cap them straight away. Remembering that this is very important whether you're reusing the injectors or not. If the customer turns around and says, oh no, I don't want to do the job, and you have to put them back in, you don't want to influence any dust getting into those systems, okay? Next thing we're going to do is we're going to undo your return pipe. Okay, so it's on this 1kD FTV, a 12mm socket. I prefer to use single hex sockets to prevent any rounding off, also any slippage that may cause swarf to drop in anywhere. And now it's a 17mm down the end here. You undo the one that actually attaches it to the cylinder head. Now make sure that the washers stay, or ensure that the banjo bolts stay on part of the pipe itself. This way you'll prevent the washer from dropping off. Okay, so they use a saddle design clamp style washer that saddles itself across the rail. Okay, this is the return rail, so you'll see they use a saddle style washer there. Remove that. Then the next step is to undo the clamps themselves. Remember to discard the bolts immediately. Do not mix them up with the ones you're going to replace. If by any chance that an injector washer has already blown out and been leaking, and you've got a situation where your injector is being bounced around like that, then I advise to replace all of these clamps, particularly the one that's been loose, because they bounce around, they do become fatigued, and I've seen them bounce out high. They've come out the top of the rocker cover and bash the bottom of the intercooler. So another thing to be aware, if they ever come loose, look at the bottom of the intercooler. Okay, so we're going to discard the bolt. We're going to replace the bolt. In this case, we're going to discard the clamp as well. You can keep the washers and reuse the tapered washer. Okay, now before removing the injectors, strongly advised to either take a photo of the top of the injectors for the coating, or write down the coating and match them per cylinder, because in that situation where you're going to put the injectors back in, you're going to want to know exactly where they were before and code them, so you don't have to spend another hour recoating the old injectors. In a case of new injectors, then it's not such a big deal. Okay, so an absolute must, whether you're replacing an injector or not, we do advise to dust cap them off. With the Toyota 1kD FTV, the camshafts are in the way of being able to get a grab tool to hook, like the leg design to hook underneath the injector. So in a situation, if the injector is seized in there, so always attempt to, first of all, if it has been leaking, you can apply some acetone and transmission fluid, and so you mix that stuff together and soak it around the outside. This works better on engines if you can actually still have them running, so external mounted injectors, that works much better on. Often with an injector underneath the rocker cover, you won't have a situation where the injector is hard to get out, because the oil soaks up the carbon and enables that to break down, enabling easy remove the injector. We're going to remove the top of the solenoid as such. Okay, so what we're looking at is the removing that actual solenoid itself. So with the injector in place, it's best to, if the injector's tight, like locked in there, then it's not going to be a drama trying to undo that nut. If that's tight enough, it will then undo that nut without the injector moving. What we're going to do, we're going to remove the solenoid. Remember to be particularly careful, there's a couple of components inside there spring as such. This is why I don't recommend you refit an injector afterwards. We're going to adapt. Okay, can be a little bit finicky. Just wind it back is the best way to grab the thread. It's such a fine thread. Using an upward motion of the large hammer section of the slide hammer, and then start belting away until that eventually removes the injector itself. Now you note there's no washer on the end of the injector itself, which means the washer must be still in the base of the head. This is where you must ensure that every time you remove an injector, immediately remove the injector washer. Avoid leaving it in there and doubling up. So this is a basic 14mm by 1.5mm thread that attaches to the top of the Bosch design piezo injectors. Okay, there's no requirement to remove any solenoid, it just screws to the top. That same size is also applicable to your Delphi design injector. Okay, so it's also the same thread. No requirement to remove any solenoids as such. So this is your traditional Bosch injector with a solenoid which has a removable nut. Now, a situation where you are having to remove the solenoid to remove an injector from a cylinder head, because it seized in severely, is you have to remove this. Now, quite often people will lose the internal guts of those injectors. The other problem is contamination. So again, strongly advised, do not reuse injectors if a solenoid is removed to remove the injector. So to actually remove that solenoid, you're going to have to use a special tool like this. Hollow end of the Allen key, which fits appropriately over that solenoid itself. It unscrews that solenoid. So this is the reason why we're doing this, is because you'll have a situation where the slide hammer may not be able to hold on this thread too well because the injector is completely seized in. Okay, so we've now removed that complete nut and solenoid component part of it, and then that will enable you to actually adapt the this size here, which is the M17 by 1. Now that'll screw down through the center of the injector. This gives you quite a bit more grab on the injector. It's definitely a much solid, stable thread. You can also tighten it up there and attach the slide hammer and then remove it that way. So a tool like that will come in handy when you've got a clamp down like this, which, as you can see, is not a removable. It's actually part of the whole injector itself. Okay, so this actually has a removable solenoid in the middle without actually having to use that internal Allen key nut to remove it. Okay, so that removes very easily like that. You could get any Allen key into the middle there if required, because there's no valve in there as such. That allows you to adapt the 17mm internal. But just as easy, if it's not too tight, is we're going to use the M27, and that's going to do up around. So just wind it back, wait for the click, and then wind it in, and that will enable you to remove that design injector. If you remove the guts of some of these injectors, you may come across this tiny little piece here. Okay, very fine. Okay, and there's a tiny little ball sitting in the end there. The thing is, you may not see that. So rather than trying to search for something that may not be there or may be there and you can't find it, disregard the injector completely and replace it. Now for the Siemens injector, Siemens Continental, quite common in the Ford Rangers. It's the most popular vehicle they're mounted into. This is a air gap adjusted piezo. This one you definitely don't want to try and put it back in once you remove this solenoid. Okay, it's going to cause many issues. Okay, so for this we're going to be using the centerpiece thread as seen. Thread that in, remove the injector as such. Now for some of the injectors you may find that a difficult position to get into. You can use an adapter like this, which is a leg with a fork to embrace the injector itself. That screws into your slide hammer. That enables it to hook on there. There's 3 sizes. Get the closest size possible to grab hold of the shank. Your Delphi injector here, slightly smaller, takes the smaller size. There's also another design Delphi injector here, okay, which has got the fuel inlet on the outside there. That also takes the smaller size. You should never grab hold of injector and try to undo it with a spanner, okay? So you see this flat edge here. A lot of people made the mistake by going, oh yeah, I could get a spanner around that and just unscrew it. So what will happen if you keep unscrewing an injector to try to loosen it, especially in the motion. Now if you're going to actually do that, I suggest you go the opposite direction to undoing something. If you keep unscrewing that, the actual cap nut itself may remove from the injector and half will be still stuck in the head, and you're going to have to remove the actual cylinder head to actually get it out. Once you've removed an injector, we need to make sure that the washer has either come out with the injector itself, or you must actually remove the washer by using a special tool. Okay, so this is one that I manufactured myself many years ago. I think I've had this for about 30 years from removing old style injector washer. Now it's great when the injector washer is so easy to remove, but often they have carbon on them and they can be at times difficult to remove. If you've got some acetone and a bit of transmission, well, in these cases usually acetone is just enough without the fluid to help break it down. But just be careful when you're restarting the engine, make sure you clean all that out thoroughly. So a tool that Diesel Help Australia can supply, this is an injector seat cleaning tool, not a cutting tool. I'll explain that shortly. It also has a couple of ridges on here which you can use to remove washers if they're not too tight in place. So I'll just demonstrate how you can remove that washer. Okay, so the little lips there can actually grab the washer itself and help it remove it and pull it up against the wall. When you're actually inspecting a seat of a cylinder head where the injector sits, this is vital. You need to ensure that it is a smooth, flat surface. If there was an injector washer leaking, I'd recommend get something like a borescope to get even closer with it. Okay, so make sure that washer area is absolutely clean before you replace the injector with a new washer. So to carry out a compression test for a diesel engine, we're going to use a Mechanics Tool Hire DM13145A diesel engine compression test kit. With a compression test for a diesel engine, I strongly recommend that you remove the injectors and do it directly through the injectors. This is why we love this kit from Mechanic Tool Hire, is that it has the adapters for multiple different diameters and depth of common rail diesel injectors. So to carry out a compression test, I'm going to use this adapter here. Okay, it's got quite a large flange plate here to go over the top. That enables us to get enough grab on the injector bolt itself. Now, strongly advised to use the original bolt, because when you do replace the injectors or refit them, you're going to be replacing the injector bolt. Use the washer that matches the manufacturer. Some of the, in the kit itself, the washers may be incorrect size, they may spread apart, and they may actually jam down the actual seat themselves. So try to use the genuine one, reuse the old one. Make sure you clean the seat though. So before you actually do the compression test, it's worth cleaning the seat. And that's where you can use one of these seat cleaning tools, okay? So it's got some little sharp edges on there. The key is when actually cleaning a seat is not to actually cut a seat. A lot of people think it says injector seat cutting tool, then it's okay to cut the seat. But if you cut the seat, you're going to remove a valuable piece of a layer. And in fact, once you remove that layer of the cylinder head itself, you're going to change the height of where the injector seats into the cylinder head itself. So by cutting even 0.1 of a mil off is a vital 0.1 of a mil that changes the timing of the actual injection. The computer doesn't know the time is changed. It doesn't know the injector seating in a different position. So the closer to the piston it is, the more advanced it's going to be, the earlier the combustion is going to take place, and that's going to cause issues Particularly DPF vehicles these days are so sensitive with the airflow and the exhaust temperatures are such, easily mistaken by people leaving the old washers in or not fitting the correct size thickness washers. So to use this Delphi tool is quite easy. All we do is we have it's got its own weight. Okay, so it also has a guide in there that can sit around, that enables you so you don't get too much slop in the tool itself. Put a bit of pressure on there, but you should only remove carbon and dirt and everything like that, and then remove it, clean it out with compressed air, and also clean the end of the tool off as well so you can reuse it. Once that seat is clean, then we're going to drop the washer down. Okay, then we're going to sit the compression adapter in there. Now I'm going to use the original bolt and the washer. These cup washers, they've got a taper on them, so what I'd advise to do is if you're going to reuse the cup washer and you want to clamp down the compression tester, just flip the cup washer around so it's a wider base, sitting over the flange of the compression adapter tool, and you're going to torque it down to the OEM's torque specification. You need to make sure that that is sealing and it's holding that clamp down central. It may be worth grabbing a wider washer so it holds it down, and it only needs to be torqued down to its torque setting. Once that gauge actually stops moving, gets to its maximum, we know that that's the maximum compression of that actual cylinder itself. And you're going to do that on each cylinder. Even the most difficult ones, it doesn't matter. There's no point doing an engine compression test on only 50% of the engine. You want to do 100%, you want to measure each cylinder. Okay? Every time you remove injectors, I strongly advise that you actually do a compression test. Before you actually even replace the injectors or quote the customer, it's best to actually advise the customer to do a compression test. You want to know the condition of the engine before you invest in thousands of dollars of their money to find out the engine stuffed. And now we're refitting the injectors. Make sure a final inspection, all the seats are clean. Insert your injector washers and make sure they're actually seating correctly. Put a long rod down there to make sure they're seating properly. Make sure you've still got dust caps on the injector washer. Make sure the injector seat itself is clean. So after you remove them, if you are refitting the original ones, probably best to put them in an ultrasonic cleaner. Clean the surface here to ensure they are 100% clean. And they're now going back in. Also make sure if they've got an O-ring on them, replace the O-ring with a new one, so a new washer, new O-rings. Okay, so we're now going to install all of these injectors. If you've had the dust caps off at any time, make sure they're back on there. Okay, so always use new dust caps or clean dust caps that have been stored in a sealed area. So now all the injectors are in place. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fit up the return bar. Okay, so before fitting the return bar itself, make sure that there's no damage on the surface. Okay, so any harsh scratches, something like this one here, you need to lap it on a flat surface and lapping paste, and flat surface being glass. Make sure you replace all of these washers as well. Never reuse the old ones. For training purposes, I am reusing old ones. Okay, there's also a washer on the end here, so make sure you fit all those washers up. This is a different size banjo bolt. You can't get that in the wrong position. If you do, you'll know straight away. It's a large 17mm socket, fits over that one, and the other one uses a smaller 12mm sockets. You can put this on when the injectors are not tighten down with a clamp. That helps you maneuver them around a little bit. But what you need to do is make sure you're ready by putting on all your washers on here. Put your injector return bolts in here. Okay, so make sure the one you pick up has got a hole in it. You just don't grab any bolt that doesn't have a hole in it. So be aware when you've got bolts laying around the workshop bench, you don't just pick up the incorrect bolt. So make sure the bolt is clean. Make sure you can see through the hole. Okay, so visually inspect it. It looks clean, it's not damaged. Make sure it's not twisted at all. Some people have over tightened these before and gotten away with it, but if you go to redo it yourself, it could be twisted and can actually crack easily. So When you do remove them, I want you to inspect everything for any damage. Now with the injectors being loose, you can now maneuver them around so you don't cross thread these things, because sometimes these bars may be flexed a little bit when removed. So just to give an extra precaution that they're not that they're going to tighten up without cross threading them. Just nip them up for now. Okay, the reason we want to nip them up is because the injector will move around. So I'm going to clamp these injector down. Make sure before clamping them down that that taper washer is facing down to sit in the taper there. Okay, they're also designed, this little ball, make sure that's still intact. Inspect these clamps also. We've had some situations where the clamps have been cracked from fatigue from previous, where an injector has actually come loose from injector washer failure. The injector's been slamming up and down in the cylinder head and actually fatigued the clamps. So in some situations it might be worth quoting a set of clamps before you do the job. Okay, the ball itself sits into the little cup of the cam cradles. Remember to replace bolts each time. Even if you were to apply tension, like the torque setting, specified torque setting, these bolts, and then you made a mistake or you had to remove them again, make sure you got a spare set ready to go, because once they're used, that's it, one use only. Now I'm not actually going to torque these down either. These are just going to be nipped down, hand tight. Now in the situation you're using new pipes, often you're not required to do this process, but I will also advise that I want you to check the sealability of the return pipe. Okay. What I'm doing is recommending that when reusing the original pipes, okay, make sure you fit them back per cylinder that they came off, that they removed. Now fortunately enough, this set of pipes has got the clamps on them remaining. Okay, so I'm going to leave the dust cap on the back two for now, because we're not ready for those yet. And we're going to install the pipe onto the rail. We're going to install the pipe onto the injectors. And we're going to nip them down by hand before even torquing up the injectors. Now the reason why we do that is because these injectors form their own tapered seat. After they're being used once, they form a embedded seal area, and the only 100% way to confirm these are going to seal, this is why manufacturers actually do recommend you replace injector pipes after removing them, because if they misalign that taper, if it forms a new taper seal or it doesn't seal correctly, and this will only happen with engines under the rocker cover, when it's tightened down you see that slight movement, that is enough to cause a misalignment of a pipe, and when they're actually then refitted, the pipe will not seal on its original taper, forms a new one, and will start to seep out. As the fuel gets hot, viscosity becomes less and the leak becomes more present, and the fuel starts to fill up the sump. When fuel fills up the sump, the engine oil is over full. The engine has the capability of running on engine oil, pumps it back through the intake from the breather, and bang, often ends up in disaster. Engine over revs, and if not saved by the customer, can cause a big problem, such as you incurring the cost of an engine replacement. This is not a bad exercise to do, even fitting new pipes, is because you can also ensure the injector is aligned. Before we torque down the injector, I go along and do this hand tight on the injectors. Then I will tighten them up on the rail. Now that that's tight on the rail, I'm now going to just nip down the injectors. Okay, so don't reef on it because it will also move the injector slightly. So if you can, hold the injector. Just put a bit of weight against it so it doesn't try to twist it. Now often it's in place. We're just going to net them up, and now we're going to torque these down to the appropriate torque setting. I advise you to look up your manufacturer specification. Diesel Help Australia is a provider of Haynes Pro workshop data. I'm going to torque these up to the appropriate torque setting. Okay, do every injector. Then I'm going to get you to torque the return bolts themselves, okay, as accordingly to the manufacturer's specifications. Also remembering to torque down the return that's bolted into the cylinder head. Before going any further, we're going to connect up the Mighty-Vac, because we're now going to check the sealability of the actual return pipe itself. The reason for doing this, same kind of situation if your high pressure pipe is loose. Okay, so what I do before actually securing the rocker cover, we need to test that return pipe. So what we do, we put the vacuum pipe on the outlet where it comes out the cylinder head. We've torqued all our return bolts, and we're going to pump this up. So what we're going to do is, I like to just pump it up, maybe we'll go up to 15. Okay, now you should be able to walk away for 15 minutes, go and have a break, do something else if you can fill in some time there. Now, when you come back from that break, that should still remain on 15. If that's moved ever so slightly, we're sitting around about 13, you know you've got a leak, and you need to rectify that leak, confirm again that it's not leaking before actually giving it back to the customer. Okay, so if it doesn't pump up, well, then you know you've got a leak straight away, or it keeps dropping down like that slowly. There you go, you see you've got a leak there. Okay, so it must hold back in there 15, or if you want to go higher, 20. Okay, go to the maximum of the gauge if you like, as long as it holds it. It shouldn't drop at all. If it slowly leaks straight away after pumping it up, then you know you've got a leak. Okay, so the top seal themselves must be inserted. They're the seal around the solenoid. They need to be inserted first. The other seals which locate in here around the pipes, you do not put them in until the rocker cover is secure over the top, okay? Otherwise you're going to damage them trying to get them on, because they won't actually physically fit over there without ripping the seal. And it's also worth maybe putting a bit of grease around the top there to help to assist them locating on top. You may need to be wriggle it around a little bit. Okay, drops on into place. Then we're going to, before inserting this is where you make sure you're using brand new ones, okay? These are for training purposes only. They do look second hand because they are. Some people like to put a bit of grease around there. I don't advise to put grease around there because if you get a bit of dirt or anything like caught on, it'll go into the injector. So as long as they're spotlessly clean, the injector's clean, then you're going to push them back into place. You're going to put the new ones in over there. Okay, so push them in. New ones in place. Then we're going to remove the dust caps off the injector outlets, the injector pipe outlets on the rail, and we're going to fit our injector pipes on accordingly. Now in these cases, if you'd like to put a bit of grease on the outside of the injector cap nut itself, the injector pipe nut, that's okay, just make sure you put it on the outside. So once you've got all the pipes into place on the rocker cover, just go along with a spanner and tighten them up. There are actual torque settings, but there are quite a variety of different torque settings for different pipes, and also can be quite difficult to actually get an appropriate socket on there. So it's a matter of just getting into the feel of how tight things are. Now if a pipe is not tight enough, one way of finding out is that if you go to crank the engine, there will actually be no pressure. So that also will answer the question many have have asked over the time is, do I crack an injector pipe to bleed the air out of the fuel system? Well, with common rail diesel, no, because there is always going to be the problem where it won't build the pressure up and needs resistance there. I have in several opportunities where we've had to advise how to bleed a common rail system after they replaced the injectors and couldn't get it running, is we've said to suggested using something to assist the engine spinning over a little bit quicker to increase the rail pressure from the pump, or soon after cranking, just slightly unnip the pipe, give it a quick crank and then nip it back up straight away. But as soon as you've undone that pipe, it won't actually build up any pressure. Okay, and then just clean down the area with some brake clean and start the vehicle and run it, and just give it a few good revs once the oil pressure's built up.